Hearing on the Bush administration's new space initiative, which includes plans for a return to the moon and human exploration of Mars. This is about 2 hours and 45 minutes.
On January 14, 2004, the President announced a new vision for the nation's space exploration program, a vision that gives NASA a new focus and clear objectives, which the Columbia Action and Investigation Board concluded were sorely lacking. The man tasked with implementing this new vision is NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe. I can think of few people more qualified to try to do this. I welcome Administrator O'Keefe and congratulate him on NASA's recent accomplishments, including the success of the robotic rovers on Mars, the collection of comet dust from Comet Wild 2 that will be returned to Earth for analysis, and the receipt of new images of deep space from the Spitzer Space Telescope. But while he's more qualified than most any that I've ever known, particularly considering his experience as Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, I'm very curious to hear how Administrator O'Keefe thinks we can implement the President's proposal with the very limited resources that have been proposed. 2 days ago, the Congressional Budget Office estimated that the deficit in fiscal year 2004 would reach $477 billion. It's been reported that the President's new proposal could cost between $170 billion and $600 billion. Needless to say, the $12 billion that the administration has suggested to be spent over the next 5 years falls far, far short of what might be required to actually return to the moon and reach for Mars and beyond. We must acknowledge that space exploration, particularly manned exploration, is costly. We have existing obligations relating to the safe operation of the shuttles and the International Space Station. I think the American public is justifiably apprehensive about starting another major space initiative for fear that they will learn later that it will require far more sacrifice or taxpayer dollars than originally discussed or estimated. As I mentioned during Administrator O'Keefe's confirmation hearing, a vision without a strategy is just an illusion. The country is not interested in nor can it afford another space illusion. Therefore, I look forward to hearing from Administrator O'Keefe, along with our other witnesses today, about the strategy that they believe will make the administration's vision a reality. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome the Administrator as well today and thank him for his service. I'd just like to make 2 points very briefly, Mr. Chairman. The last time the Administrator was here, I asked that the agency initiate a cost-benefit analysis to look at the matter of manned spaceflight. And if anything, the developments of the last few weeks have, I think, increased the need for just such an analysis. If anything, if you look at the plans that have been announced recently by the President, it is clear that they focus even more extensively on human spaceflight. And so, Mr. Administrator, the first question that I'll ask you is to get into this question of the cost effectiveness of manned spaceflight, because it's very clear that given the ambitions of the President and the budgetary realities, it's important that we get a sharper and more focused sense of what can be done through manned spaceflight and what can be done through other operations. The other area that I'm going to ask you about, Mr. Administrator, is I have to tell you I was extremely disappointed to learn that the agency collected personal data on more than 10 million Northwest airline passengers in 2001 and retained that data for years without informing the passengers that the agency had this personal information. In 2003, Northwest had more than 500,000 passengers travel in and out of Portland International Airport. So I can only imagine how many of my constituents had their personal information simply handed over to the agency. I have legislation right now, the Citizens Protection and Federal Databases Act, which aims to correct the careless collection and dissemination of private personal information by federal agencies. My understanding is that the agency has now asked Northwest to hand over the information. The airline has agreed, but I'd like to know that prior to that, what steps were taken to protect the more than 10 million individuals that were caught up in that database. So those two areas I'll be exploring with you specifically this morning. Mr. Chairman, again, I thank you for the hearing, and this is an important time for the agency. Mr. O'Keefe has always been extremely responsive to our inquiries, and look forward to discussing these issues with him this morning.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. I'd like to remind my colleagues that we have votes starting at 11:40, and we have another panel as well as questions for Administrator O'Keefe. Senator Brownback.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding the hearing. And congratulations, Mr. Administrator. We've had you up here for a number of hearings over the past year, and they haven't generally been a very joyous occasion. And right now you've got, I just came from the office, and they're shooting back pictures from your second rover that's on Mars now, and just amazing photography. And 2 for 2 in a place that's pretty tough to get one to land is an extraordinary feat. So congratulations to you and the agency for getting that done. And I want to thank you for listening to people in the Congress, particularly members in the Senate, about articulating a vision and getting us out of low space orbit in the manned program. A number of us have met with you over a period of time, and I remember a particular meeting with the Vice President, where a number of us were saying, we need a vision, we need it articulated by the administration, and you've put that forward. And I appreciate you laying that out. I think it's a bold vision. I think it's aggressive. What I also like is your pay-for strategy that you've put, where it's basically redirecting current funds with some additional, but not a great deal of additional funds. I think it does both break us out of low space orbit, where we've been stuck for the last 20-plus years in the manned program, and sets a bold yet achievable vision, and it causes us as a society to lean forward and lean into it and not say, you know, we're going to wait on the Europeans to go to the moon, or we're going to wait on the Chinese to go to the moon. We're going to let somebody else lead in this because it's too dangerous, it's too expensive. No, it's none of that. You're saying we're going to lead forth. And if others want to join us, we want them there. But that's the right way, and that's the place for this country to be. And it's that kind of vision that encourages the 13-year-old young man or woman in Pittsburgh, Kansas, to dream great dreams that are critically important to the future of this society. So I'm glad you put it forward. I want to ask you some specific questions about making sure we stay on target with this one and not sliding off like we have sometimes in the past when these have been articulated. Welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Nelson.
Senator Breaux just said he really thinks that rover is wandering around in the Mojave Desert. Like those who said cheaper, that's right. Like those who said we never went to the moon. Mr. Chairman, space flight, you can't do it on the cheap. And I just don't think that $1 billion increase over 5 years, that's $200 million a year, is going to do it. And I would love for you to explain on the reprogramming of the $11 billion over that 5 years, how you can do that. I think my other concern is I would not like to see repeated the period of time between 1975 and 1981 when we were down and not flying with humans. When Apollo-Soyuz last flew and the Space Shuttle was supposed to fly 3 years later, it wasn't until '81, a total of 6 years, that we were down. And my concern in what you've outlined and what the President outlined in the speech over at NASA headquarters is that you phase out the Space Shuttle by 2010, and then if we don't fly this new vehicle until 4, 5, 6 years later, that means that our only human access to space is that we've got to rely on Russian rockets and European rockets, and I don't think that's good for the country. And so rather than having a hiatus, I would love to have you comment as to how we might have an overlap where we would keep the space shuttle flying until such time as the other vehicle is already tested and ready to fly. And then the other thing that I would say, Mr. Chairman, is a project of this magnitude, it can only be led by the President or the Vice President. And I was one of the cheerleaders that was there when the President made his announcement. But 6 days later, when he had the opportunity to put some juice behind it and the prestige of his office, he did not mention it in the State of the Union speech. And so if we do not have the full weight of the President behind it, I'm afraid it's going to fizzle. And it's going to make it very difficult for us up here to get the votes to sustain a program such as this. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Again, I would request that my colleagues keep their opening statements brief, as we have another panel and votes beginning at 11:40, as I understand. Senator Hutchison.
Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I just want to say thank you, Administrator O'Keefe. I have been one that has pressed you since you took office, from the day that you had your hearing to become NASA Administrator, about a vision for NASA. I have felt that we have drifted since our early successes in space. Our successes in space cannot be refuted. We dominate the skies. We have gotten tremendous benefits for our defense and our national security, and the benefits for quality of life and the industries that have been spurred are unquestionable. I love the vision of the President. I think that it took a major address, which many of us encouraged him and you and the Vice President to do. I do think that follow-through and follow-up is going to be important. The only thing that I would say in closing, because I want to be brief, but I certainly want to look at the details of the budget. I, too, am concerned that we want to make sure we do this right, not only for safety, but for making sure that we throw good money after good money, that we don't try to do something big, not do it right, get nothing from it, and waste the effort and the money. So I hope that we will go forward, realistically have a budget that will do the job right, and I will be very anxious to see where you're going to take money from, the $11 billion that would be taken away from other programs, because, of course, I would hope that we would make sure that the programs that are going to support man on the moon and getting there, but the programs themselves would be kept and solidified as we are making this major commitment. So I thank you for forcing the vision. Now let's work together to implement that vision in the right way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Breaux.
Would you like me to be brief, Mr. Chairman?
He only says that before I speak, Mr. Breaux.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having the hearing. I think that it's an indication of the interest this committee has and the Senate has in the subject matter that Mr. O'Keefe brings to the table. We have a good turnout of members, and shows a real interest in the program. I'm concerned, Sean, I think, with what I would term the uncertainty of where we are. I think you're hearing that from many of the opening comments. The last time you and I visited, we were talking about an OSP, which was the orbital space plane. Since that time, I understand that that is no longer there. We're now talking about the CEV, or the Crew Exploration Vehicle. So we made some changes in direction. We're now talking about going back to the moon. We've already been there. but we're going back, and we now have 2 unmanned vehicles on the planet Mars. We're talking about reprogramming $11 billion. There's a lot of uncertainty as what's going to be cut and where the money is going to come from to raise the necessary funds to do these very adventurous programs. I support it very strongly, the concept of increasing and expanding space exploration. I think we down on Earth get a great deal of benefit from those activities, and they're extremely important. But what I think we're looking for today is a clearer path as to how we get from here to there. There's been a lot of changes, a lot of personnel changes, a lot of project changes. And I think what Congress wants to know that we indeed not only are on the right path to get to the Mars, but we indeed here on Earth, we are on the right path to be able to accomplish those goals. And that's what we're looking for. Thank you.
Senator Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator O'Keefe, for being here with us. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I commend you and your entire team for the historic achievements on the Mars exploration. It's fascinating to me and to all people here on Earth. This is a day in history, January 28th, 1986. It may have been mentioned at about an hour or so from now when we had the tragic explosion of the Challenger. And NASA's beginning more journeys. Obviously, the Columbia tragedy is one that propels you all, and I know it's lifted the spirits of everyone, the Mars exploration. Now, we're going forward with this, or at least the President has proposed to go forward with a space exploration program, which is a very unique national asset. I think that in doing so, listening to Senators Breaux and Hutchison and others, is that the key is a strategic plan that is executed with proper preparation, with constraints on spending, just making sure that there's not just a logic, but obviously your essential leadership in the first, let's say, 5 years of this new strategic plan. I do think space exploration makes good sense for us in a variety of ways, in knowledge and innovation and discovery. I do want to make sure, and you've heard me say this before, Mr. Chairman of this whole committee, that in NASA, remember the aeronautics aspect of NASA. As you move forward, I want to be assured that this new initiative does not have a negative impact on the aeronautics research and development budget. The vision, as I understand it, calls for $1 billion increase over the next 5 years. It also calls for reprogramming of the existing $11 billion within NASA to cover these costs. I do see from this budget here, though, the strategy based on long-term affordability, and I would like to see the numbers behind it, but it appears that for at least the next 3, maybe 4 years, that the aeronautics and other science activities would actually decrease until FY maybe 08. In it. Now, aeronautical advancements are absolutely essential for our national security. You see it in every military action. We saw it in Iraq on how important that is. The research and development budgets have been cut from $920 million in 1998 to just over $500 million in 2003. At the same time, our friends in Europe are, of course, developing a long-term plan to achieve global leadership in civil aviation. So for the sake of civil aviation, also our national security, I want to make sure as you go forward with this new strategic plan, as we go through the details of it, that we do not forget aeronautics, which are so essential to our country, to our security as well. And I look forward to your remarks, and I'd like to put my statement into the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Without objection, Senator Lautenberg, congratulations on behalf of all of us on your recent marriage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the good wishes. I hope that my marriage lasts as long as this trip is going to take to get us to Mars. Hope that I last that long. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing this morning, and I'll try to be brief. I ask the consent that my full statement be included in the record.
Without objection.
All right, thank you. There's an estimate out there by the administration that this mission might cost $170 billion. And the talk about a human presence on Mars, I find interesting, but frankly, I also find it to be challenging. Challenging because we're seeing so much by the way of technological development that surprises us all. And talking to some friends in medicine and talking about how much more accurate, how much more reliable it is to do brain surgery with instruments going into the head and the scalp. And I have that interest because I had a ski accident last year, and thank goodness the guy wasn't nervous who did this thing. I don't think, anyway. You'll have to make that judgment. But the fact of the matter is that we found that areas around the heart are better tended to electronically, mechanically, than human intervention. And I really wonder, Mr. O'Keefe, and I salute you and all the people there who tried so hard, and I know the heartbreak that the agency's been through, and that they've done the best that they could. And perhaps we could even do better. What was it financed at a higher level? But right now, we're looking at a $5.6 trillion reduction in the surplus and into a $3.5 trillion deficit, and on the eve of the baby boomers getting ready to retire. And I wonder what the President's mission is here when we talk about the kind of expense that it would take to move people back up into space, to get them to Mars, stop along the way on the moon. And when there's so much by way of current domestic need, last month the economy created 1,000 jobs. At that rate, it'd take nearly 250 years just to get back to the private sector job level that we had before. 43 million Americans without health insurance. So I'm not unalterably opposed to space exploration. I'm excited as the next person about the images that we're getting back from the moon, and I salute again the agency for the work that it did with the rovers up there. But the question is, can we afford to do this, and is it really necessary? I don't know whether the question about whether a human presence is really essential to get the information we want, or whether it can be done electronically and scientifically. And so, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses how we can possibly reconcile our current budget woes with the cost that it's going to require of sending humans back to the moon and then on to Mars. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, Mr. O'Keefe, for being here and the work that you do.
Thank you, sir. Senator Sununu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Administrator O'Keefe. You've had a lot of quality FaceTime on TV lately. You and your staff are to be congratulated, and I certainly join others in wishing you luck in the coming weeks on the science expeditions on Mars. Mr. Chairman, I'll submit any formal statement for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Stevens.
I have no formal statement. I'm glad to see our friend Sean O'Keefe here. He swore in the other day, the new comptroller of NASA, and we discussed the President's program at that time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. O'Keefe.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. And if you would, I'll submit the statement for the record and quickly summarize. As I understand, the committee has indulged to permit a showing of a short video here. Excuse me, I'm not having it on.
A little closer, I think.
A little closer. Did that work? Okay, excuse me.
Better.
If I could, I'll submit the statement for the record, briefly summarize and understand the committee's indulgences to have a video here we've got available here in just a moment. First and foremost, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, as all the members recall, very specifically called out the requirement in their view that there be established a statement and a clear understanding of a vision and a strategy and a direction for the space exploration endeavor. And that was one of the very fundamental aspects of their findings of what they believed was not only necessary, but in turn also its absence in the recent past they view as being a fundamental factor that led to, in their mind, the conditions under which the accident occurred. That having been produced on August the 26th, a few months before that, we began an interagency process that we have discussed at this committee on several occasions, as well as others around the Congress,
have requested the input and have received it from several members, and very much appreciate the time and effort and energy that's been taken to help shape this objective. The administrative work of pulling together all those internal interagency efforts was conducted over the course of that time, and the President announced on January 14th the vision that has been called for by the Action Investigation Board, by several members of Congress, by any other external commentary that could be offered. The vision forms the basis of a new space exploration policy. It is a presidential directive. It is established as the direction that vitiates all prior effort that would have governed the space policy direction. A renewed spirit of discovery is its title. The policy is the product, again, of that extensive interagency process, as well as solicitation and view of various members and others in the community. The fundamental goals of the exploration policy is to advance U.S. scientific and economic interests through a robust space exploration program, to implement and sustain an affordable human and robotic program. It is a very carefully crafted combination of both. A return to the moon by the end of the next decade in preparation for human exploration beyond. Promotion of international and commercial participation in exploration to further that scientific, security, and economic interest as well. The fundamental elements of that the President described in great detail on the 14th of January, and I will quickly summarize here, is first and foremost the direction from him to return the Space Shuttle to flight. Our objectives are to follow the recommendations of the Action Investigation Board. We have embraced that report. We will comply with it in its entirety and assure that when we return to flight, we have determined that we are fit to fly in accordance with those recommendations. And so as soon as practical, that event will occur. The purpose of that return to flight and the necessity to continue operating the Space Shuttle for the foreseeable future in this decade is to complete the International Space Station. It is the only research platform for the purpose of fully understanding the effects on long-duration human space flight. And so understanding what those physiological and human effects are and how to conquer them properly for future exploration objectives that are called for in the President's vision and strategy statement are a necessity that we will continue to perform on the International Space Station. We've agreed with our other 15 partners from around the globe, and I've consulted with them extensively on the means by which we will complete that assembly sequence over the course of the next several years, with the objective of retiring the shuttle after the assembly of the station is complete at the end of the decade. Next is a movement in a direction very specifically towards a crew exploration vehicle, and again, Senator Breaux referred specifically to this point. This is an objective of building on the capacity of the orbital space plane and the capabilities that we investigated over the course of the past year, and developing then instead a capability that takes it the next step beyond that, beyond low Earth orbit, whereas the orbital space plane was specifically an objective of taxi between here and station, not designed to go beyond that objective. So in that context, what the President's call for is an exploration vehicle that can progress beyond low Earth orbit, return to the moon, Mars, and beyond for the purpose of those objectives. Under the name and title of Project Constellation, we will proceed ahead with the development of that exploration vehicle to provide crew transport for exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit. In addition, lunar exploration objectives are underway. We'll be pursuing in a robotic form for the balance of this decade to begin those efforts, and again with the objective of looking towards the middle of the next decade for a return to the moon as well. Exploration of Mars, I believe we've seen that illustrated in grand fashion here in recent days, and so to build and develop more on the basis of that particular success and to inform the investigation necessary based on the science to pursue those destinations in the future is what he has called for in his vision statement as well. To help derive the view of what other efforts are necessary to implement this strategy, because again, this was an interagency process of public servants within the administration who developed the options for the President's consideration. He chose the strategy he announced on the 14th of January, but it was primarily derived from the work of this interagency process internal to the administration, in addition to the inputs that we've received from members of Congress and elsewhere. But to formalize that a bit more and fully understand what other implementation strategies we may pursue, other factors from a more broader external basis. The President's asked former Secretary of the Air Force Pete Aldridge to chair a commission to look at implementation strategies of this vision. This is a specific set of objectives that is articulated in the President's directive, and in turn, how do we go about implementing it best? And his task over the course of the next 4 months will be to gather those thoughts from a broader external set of inputs in order to factor in as we move ahead with the President's program that will be announced and laid out on February the 3rd as part of the President's budget submission, the approaches that we need to take in the years ahead in order to achieve this particular objective. In the immediate time after the President's speech, the next day, we announced a reorganization of the agency to establish a exploration systems enterprise to look at the task of accomplishing the President's objectives as a system of systems. It is not a singular program. It is not a singular set of objectives. It is a range of capabilities that can be employed, informed by what we receive, I think, from the continuing efforts of the various program engagements that we'll see in the President's budget, as well as that which is offered to us by this external panel in order to move ahead on a broader range. And as a consequence, the Exploration Systems Enterprise will have the primary responsibility for the development of the crew exploration vehicle under the term Project Constellation, and in turn also coordinate the Project Prometheus efforts for power generation and propulsion capabilities beyond low Earth orbit. We've also established an aeronautics enterprise, very specifically titled as an aeronautics enterprise, with the objective of assuring that it not get lost in the equation, because it's an essential piece of what we do and how we're organized. And so as a consequence, there is a very clear focus on that objective as well. The vision, as you'll see, I think when the President's budget comes out next week, and I would hope that members would examine that budget before making determinations of its overall efficacy or utility. It will be out next week, and the full detail will be available, is, in our judgment, an affordable effort, both short-term as well as long-term. The request to be released on the 2nd is fiscally responsible. It fits in the context of the overall statement the President has made on what drove his budget considerations for the 2005 submission to achieve a half of the deficit projection within the next 5 years, as well as to maintain spending in the coming year to less than 4%. We are within that amount, and over the course of the 5 years are also projected within the overall budget projection to be in that context as well. And more on that, again, after next week, as you see the detail that's relayed very specifically. As an immediate example of the illustration of how this strategy will be carried out, I would submit that the spirit and opportunity experiences we've had here in the last 3 weeks are an illustration of how that robotic capability can be a precursor to future exploration agenda. And it is about exploration. That is the primary focus of what the President's guidance and directive has stated to us in terms of what the focus needs to be in its context needs to be considered in. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to, if you would indulge, just play a short video that gives you a sense of a combination of things. This is an animation of what occurs as the Mars exploration rovers are approaching the planet, as well as the splicing in of real scenes of the landing sequence, as well as some images from both the Spirit and Opportunity landing sites that were established. And if you will, Mr. Chairman, I'll play that this time.
John.
3, 2, 1. terminal velocity. Spacecraft reporting that the radar is in lock and we have a good solution on the ground. Radar is working. Expected retro rocket ignition on mark. Waiting confirmation from the spacecraft that retro rocket ignition has occurred. At this point in time, we should be on the ground. Stand by. Now, 6 minutes, 37 seconds in atmospheric history. Go away signal that we are on the ground. We got 6 lines of bouncing on the surface. Copy that, but only by about 30 minutes later.
Start working right away.
Oh, yeah. That's looking down on our vehicle. We're seeing it on the LPP. Very strong in LPP. We have a very strong signal in the infrared channel, indicating that we still have the same radio signal on RTP. Oh.
Mr. Chairman, these are precisely the kinds of precursor robotic missions we will continue with a lot in the future in order to advance before the human exploration endeavor is engaged in, but it is an integral, interrelated kind of activity. We are, as Senator Allen referred to, extremely mindful of the risks that are attendant to this exploration endeavor. Today is the 18th anniversary of the loss of Challenger. And we'll announce this afternoon the naming of the site that Opportunity landed at as the Challenger Memorial Station. Yesterday, the anniversary of the Apollo 1 fire, mindful again of the risks of exploration that we continue to pursue. The planes that you saw, the number of ridge lines at the Spirit site, the 3 highest peaks are named for Grissom, Chaffee, and White, those that we lost on that fateful day. And as we continue on through this very, very difficult weekends ahead of us to recognize and to commemorate the lives and celebrate the lives of 7 extraordinary people aboard Columbia, I think more will be recognized on precisely their contributions as well. But that is part of what helped motivate this change in the vision. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board's call for exactly this kind of a statement, I think, is the legacy of Columbia and those who followed or those who preceded. And we intend to honor that legacy with the best of our ability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to have you back again, Mr. O'Keefe. In your written testimony, you've stated that NASA will be making decisions on how to best implement new programs, some of which, quote, will not be easy, unquote. Tell us the ones that are not going to be easy.
Well, I think the first and foremost, the crew exploration vehicle that under Project Constellation that we will establish, that is again an advancement, an evolution of, if you will, of the orbital space plane approach. Its objectives will require the capacity to carry humans beyond low Earth orbit. It's been a while since we've done that properly, and the technology has changed dramatically. That's going to take an awful lot of work. And again, the Exploration Systems enterprise is being focused on that very objective. Similarly, the approach that we've talked about in the past of Project Prometheus of developing power generation and propulsion capabilities is not something we've done before. We have to find a breakthrough for that in order to inform these missions in a way that would be more contemporary, faster than what we typically do now. It takes 7 months to get to Mars. That's not a tolerable period of time for continuing those kinds of exploration missions. And finally, I think the one that's going to be extremely difficult to work through, and it's going to augur in favor of continuing operations of International Space Station for the foreseeable future, is to understand the human effects, human endurance challenges of long-duration spaceflight. It will be a primary vehicle and platform for the United States in order to focus on that research and scientific inquiry. Our partners will continue to look at a range of scientific endeavors, but ours will be focused primarily on that which it takes to proceed with expeditionary, long-endurance spaceflight missions. Those are the ones that I believe are the near-term, immediate kinds of challenges, and we'll continue along on others as well.
The underlying question that all of us have is the cost estimates and the budgetary plans that we have. When we look back at the past cost of programs in NASA, there's been one constant, and that is that the costs have exceeded the initial estimates. What assurance do we have that these budgetary projections, in light of very ambitious schedule and goals, can be met? What's different?
Sure. Well, I think you put your finger on a point that we spent a lot of time working through. First and foremost, it is the nature of development programs that cost estimating is extremely vague. It's very difficult to do when you're developing something that's never been done before or hasn't been tried or tested elsewhere. And as a consequence, it means that we really have to build in, I think, a very prudent level of reserves and accommodation of what those costs will entail. And I think the committee has done, I think, a very important effort on International Space Station, for example, of really forcing the kind of fiscal discipline that's in evidence now, that we have before us right now, as a cost estimate for the completion of International Space Station that over the course of the last 2 years is very much a managed major systems integration effort that is an illustration of the kinds of things we got to do consistently in the future. We now have that experience of doing it properly. The committee has really contributed heavily to the task of forcing that fiscal discipline, and I think we've arrived at that point. In addition, I think the future is, if I could take issue just a bit with one element of your commentary, it is not an aggressive schedule. It is one that is very prudently laid out that intends to transform the objectives over time. And the reason it is fiscally prudent in the judgment of the administration, and what you'll see next week is the evidence in detail of it, is, again, the completion of the individual steps. Return to flight, bring the shuttle back into operational service, complete the International Space Station, retire the shuttle, and then move on more aggressively at that point towards the continued effort of the rest of the components of the vision. Meanwhile, there's a number of factors that are built into this over the course of this next 5 years, which will incrementally and step by step move our way through that set of exploration goals the President's outlined and establish the baseline for its pursuit.
Senator Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The President made a terrific proposal that I had the privilege of being there and supporting publicly and privately. This program's not going anywhere unless it has the full support of the White House. Why didn't the President mention it 6 days later in his State of the Union speech?
This program has the complete and full 100% support of the President, the Vice President, the administration, all the way through. He made an extensive speech that, again, I'm just delighted you were there for, Senator. It was a very extended discussion of exactly his objectives. The presidential directive that follows this, that's posted on everybody's website, is the most comprehensive in space policy in anyone's memory. I've only been around here a couple of years associated with this agenda, but those who've been following it longer would attest to the fact this is the most comprehensive space policy statement in a long, long time. The State of the Union address is not a tick list of things that have been discussed previously. It is not an inventory of all other matters. And so as a consequence, I would not have expected, given the mere 5 days before the delivery of that address, that he would have reiterated it, given the comprehensive nature of that speech. There is not a question in my mind that the President's fully behind this. And what you'll see on Monday when the President's budget arrives is an endorsement of this directive with the resources necessary to carry it out.
I accept your answer, and I certainly hope you're right. Tell us about, there was a lot of anticipation that there was going to be suggested 5% increases in the NASA budget. That was the talk for some 2 weeks prior to the President's announcement. And yet what was announced, $1 billion over 5 years, that's $200 million a year. That's just a little over a 1% increase per year. How do you reconcile the two?
Again, when the budget comes out next week, what you'll see in evidence is a very clear expression of the resources necessary to carry out this statement, the presidential directive, this strategy. And the percentage increases year by year are from the baseline of what the Congress enacted in fiscal year '04, just a few days ago. And so what's contained in that is a specific endorsement of the specific programs necessary to carry out this directive. The percentages are what they are based on, once you see the detail, make a determination as to whether you think they're adequate or not at that time.
Well, for those of us who are going to have to carry the water for you up here, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing that. Tell me about the hiatus. 2010, stop the shuttle, and then the new vehicle isn't ready for some number of years. As I expressed in my opening comments, isn't that a very vulnerable position for the country to have to rely on Russian and European rockets, and isn't that a dismantling of this experienced core of NASA employees that would of necessity be dismantled? And isn't that bring up the fearful refrains from what we experienced 20 years ago?
Sure. Well, two points, Senator. I appreciate the point because it is it's an issue of timing and sequencing that's far out in the future, but one we really need to be mindful of what its implications could be. First and foremost, today, we are engaged in spaceflight activities with our Russian partners right now. Over the course of this past year, we have not flown a human in space other than on a Russian capability. The depth of this partnership, if there was any doubt about it, has been demonstrated very impressively over the course of this last year. Our Russian, European, Canadians, and Japanese partners have done an absolutely astonishing job of stepping up at exactly when we needed it most, at a time of crisis and challenge in which we could not have maintained the International Space Station or a human presence in space. And now we see the third year of a continuous human presence as a consequence of a collaborative partner arrangement that is working and working very impressively. That said, your point is well taken. I mean, the objective is to complete the International Space Station in the assembly complete configuration that the international partners will help configure and determine exactly what that will look like by the end of this decade. At the time in which the shuttle's cargo lift capacity is completed for that important mission, that's the stage in which the shuttle will retire. Concurrently, developing under Project Constellation, a exploration vehicle system, the approach will be to, as soon as we can deliver that capability, to have that capable of beyond low Earth orbit exploration, as well as potentially that which is required for taxi between here and International Space Station along the way. There shouldn't be a huge lift in that regard. That said, we don't want to develop a success-oriented strategy, so there's a catch-22 here. That to the extent that we end up with a capability that what we, I think, explored and evolved under the orbital spaceplane approach was that a very aggressive program would yield that capability by the end of the decade. This is going to be a requirement beyond low Earth orbit, and we want to get it right. So we're going to use a page from plenty of successful acquisition experiences of a spiral development approach to launch different components in sequence as early as 2008 to begin the first of those spiral development component launches, unmanned, to test that capability to assure that we can get to a Project Constellation exploration vehicle capability. And in doing so, that will drive the date as opposed to any artificial date we may put on the wall. We're trying to be as I think, realistic as possible to say that we're trying to drive in technology that hasn't been used for this kind of a mission ever to go beyond low Earth orbit and to not develop a success-driven strategy that is doomed to requiring a success at every spiral development phase. So to the extent there's a gap, that will occur after the next decade, and we'll have to work out what those challenges are at that time. But it is one that we are currently managing, and hopefully I think we'll have to work our way through whatever else may materialize, but that's not something we're anticipating at this moment as being a challenge in the next 7 years.
You see my concerns.
Yes, sir.
And the reprogramming concerns as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Brownback.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, I want to follow on this series of questions here about the retirement of the shuttle program, and you're relying on reprogramming of that money, much of it to launch into the next phase, next initiative, and I think that's wise to do. Do you have to have shuttle to finish the International Space Station, or could you, because it's been such a successful partnership with the Russians and the European space agencies, or I've had a number of commercial sector people come up here saying, you know, we'd like a piece of more of this action ourselves. Could you feasibly take more missions up with lower payload and be able to complete the ISS in an earlier fashion and retire shuttle sooner?
We've looked at every permutation of this, and again, the station was designed and the components and modules developed in order to fit in the cargo bay. It becomes the optimum vehicle for completion of International Space Station. So this is the most efficient, cost-effective way to do that. The components and modules are stacking up at the Kennedy Space Center right now. It's quite a display. And the testing and integration work that's necessary in order to load in the cargo bay those capabilities for the next roughly 25 to 30 flights will be required in order to complete station. That's been optimally configured for shuttle flights, and any other combination would be a very inefficient, extremely difficult way to redesign that whole effort now, and would take more time. Our objective is to get to the completion of station as soon as we can and have it fully operational for the purposes for which it was originally designed. in addition to the refocused research agenda we're now on. So the determination is that is the best way to conclude, and that's the direction that the President has instructed us to proceed in.
I understand that, and I appreciate it. I wonder still if there isn't a way to do this off of the partners because of the cost that shuttle has grown for us. The cost of running the shuttle fleet and what it has been and the projection of retiring it. I may pursue that some more with you on a second area.
I really enjoyed the opportunity to do that because the lift capacity they have is nowhere near what we can do on shuttle, but we can pursue that much further with you, yes, sir.
You indicated in your comments that you were going to engage the commercial sector as well in going to the moon. Would you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, it's the objective is, again, we haven't done this now in 35 years, and it is a lot of technology development has occurred in that time. So one thing we're certain of is the notion of resurrecting the way we did it 35 years ago is not an option. That's not something we're planning to do. We know how to do that, and it required brute force to leave the Earth and go that route. So instead, the approach will be to look at, again, a range of alternatives, some of which may be commercially driven. That, again, I think the illumination on those options will come from the Aldridge Commission in terms of implementation strategies and the best way they may view for us to do that. The combination of members on that commission to solicit the range of different commercial alternatives as well as international partnering arrangements, a set of options on a wide range of fronts of how to implement this best is what we're looking to them to help us understand a little better. Meanwhile, we're also going to be looking at all the commercial ideas that have been introduced and discussed and trying to bring those together to see how that may meet the goals and objectives we're looking to over the next few years.
I certainly want to encourage that because of the degree that we can tap into the commercial sector and the financing through the commercial sector or even military issues as well, we get into a lot bigger pots of funds to be able to do this and other impetus to move us on forward. And it strikes me that those are out there. They're very interested. They are intrigued. They're in some cases pretty well financed. In other cases could be, and I think it's going to be a key way we develop because that's typically how we have developed. The government will open the pathway. You get Lewis and Clark out there, but not far behind are just waves of settlers coming through on their own dime to do this, and that's going to be key for us to do. I want to say a final comment here. In your showing your video, I hope you show that a lot. I could feel the energy and the excitement of that. Not only just what happened there, but that I'm a part of a nation that does something like this, and that's willing to venture forth and to do it. And I say that selfishly because as a member of this body, to encourage and to yearn people forward is extraordinarily valuable, intangible. And an example of it on Sunday, a guy I served as a White House fellow with, who was a commander on a aircraft carrier, the recent Iraqi engagement, or recently in Afghanistan, rather. The reason he went to the Naval Academy was because of astronauts on the moon. And he remembers saying as a 12-year-old to his dad, I want to be an astronaut. And his dad said, well, most of these guys went to the Naval Academy. That's where you have to go. And he said, okay. He went to the Naval Academy. Now, he hadn't gotten to the moon, and he's not going to make it in the public sector, maybe in the private sector someday. But he served this country as a commander of an aircraft carrier and as a dedicated American. And here was a vision sown that was harvested in a great way by this nation. And that's what this is. It is expensive. It does take funds from some other areas. But what value is that intangible vision by us sowing that into young kids that are 13, 14 years old, that you say, well, if you want to do that, you're going to have to study a lot harder, or we sow it around the world. And how much more do we attract brain power into the United States by sowing that into the finest minds around the world? These are intangibles that are extraordinary value, and I commend you for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Administrator, for me, other than the safety issues, the single biggest issue is the question of what you can accomplish manned versus unmanned in terms of the agency's work. That's why I thought you all deserved a lot of credit last fall when you committed to this comprehensive cost-benefit analysis with respect to manned spaceflight. Now we're in a situation where the President is going forward with a program that involves even more human spaceflight, and yet we don't have that cost-benefit analysis in our hand. When can we expect to get that so that we can give this project the thoughtful analysis it deserves?
Yes, sir. No, thank you. It was a very important suggestion and recommendation that you made. We have operated on that. We should have the results of that available in about 3 weeks' time. And so as the budget comes out shortly thereafter, we'll see the comprehensive model of a cost-benefit analysis ready to go. It has been a real important effort, and I thank you for introducing the idea, because it really has helped contribute to shifting the way we're looking at this in many ways. I think, again, what you'll see after next week when you see the detail of the budget coming out is a much more balanced combination of robotic and human capabilities than I think you may be referring to here. It is intended as, again, part of the stepping stone approach, the kinds of things that we're doing on Mars right now, to really inform the nature of the scientific inquiry and the exploration inquiry of where we'd go with a range of robotic missions. That's how the lunar return will be conducted, many robotic capabilities before then. But there's a place for human requirements, and one of the things that's come out preliminarily in this cost-benefit analysis approach is, for example, for this mission on Mars, for any one of the rovers over the course of 90 to 120 days of scientific experimentation, a most expansive interpretation of the full volume of science we could hope to yield, short of the imagery, the actual geological content. What we're going to end up with is something equivalent to about 1 day's work if a human were doing it. We got to program every single move 24 hours in advance. As a matter of fact, we saw illustrated on the Spirit expedition that if you don't get it exactly right, it will do as a computer does that all of us are familiar with that ever use a laptop. The whole thing will freeze up and shut down on you until they understand what it is you're trying to tell them. So it takes time, and it takes a more exhaustive kind of approach to this. So if we're willing to tolerate a lot more time and a lot more money, by the time you get done with it, the combination of human versus robotic capabilities turn out to be very close. But we'll show you that as part of the cost-benefit analysis. And again, can I thank you again for prompting the inquiry which we pursued.
I appreciate your getting it to us quickly, because I can only tell you it can only build credibility for any kind of effort to go to Mars to have that kind of rigorous cost-benefit analysis, because I think otherwise the country says, well, look, the Congress is just ducking the big financial questions, and obviously we don't want to have that as we try to strike the good balance between manned and unmanned in the days ahead. Let me also ask you about this question of the agency collecting the personal data on more than 10 million Northwest airline passengers. Apparently this data was retained for years without the agency informing the passengers of their personal information. What can you tell us so as to ensure hundreds of thousands of constituents I have, for example, that information wasn't shared or misused? And we've seen some email to the on this issue that would indicate that the agency's concerned that it was misused.
Yes, sir. No, I thank you for the question. And we've, since the coverage of this here in the last few days, have really intensively looked into the detail of it. Shortly after 9/11, Northwest Airlines requested that we help with some analysis to see if there were some trend patterns that could be devised or derived from looking at this information. We have treated the information, it was about a 3-month slice of passenger data, as very, very classified information. So as a matter of fact, it was our biggest challenge, as I understand it, was even attempting to access the 18 disks of file, because they wrote it in a code that was not accessible to anyone at NASA. And as a result, it is not transferable or easily disseminated as a result of that. It was vaulted, controlled, no one accessed it other than the analyst. We determined that we couldn't, after a year, download more than a day or two worth of information of any relevance, and so therefore advised Northwest that there was little more that we could do with this and return all the data to them. So it was not disseminated, not released, and to my understanding of this, was not available in beyond the scope of what the analysts at NASA Ames were engaged in.
So this email that we've seen, the September 23rd email from one of your staff to Jay Dombrowski that says the agency wanted to avoid creating the appearance that the agency is violating people's privacy, that simply was a concern, but you found no evidence that the agency violated anybody's privacy or that the information was shared with anyone.
To the best of the information we have available right now, that's exactly right. It was not disseminated beyond that, and everything we've heard is, and we've been able to investigate on this, would suggest that it was contained very, very carefully. That said, Senator, I think this raises an important question, and it's one that I think in the wake of September 11th, so many people, I think, were looking for ways to try to protect ourselves from terrorists who would otherwise like to use commercial capabilities to kill us. And they were reaching out in lots of different directions to do that. I've been very committed to assuring that our folks understand that this really needs to then be mindful of the privacy rules and the Privacy Act and the implications thereof, that we really got to be more conscious of that as we work through this. But in no way, shape, or form should we deter anybody in our agency from thinking proactively, aggressively, on how do we use the technologies we have to conquer this challenge against us that people would like to use. And this is a delicate question, but it's one that I want to be sure that in our quest to assure privacy, which we must do as a matter of law, that we also not discourage anyone from thinking actively on how do we use these technologies that in this case didn't work, didn't help, to really go forward.
My time's up. I would only ask that you all try to lay out some rules
Yes, sir.
for using these databases, and appreciate your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir, thank you,
I just
Senator.
want to add, it's great thinking, sir, but you got to keep the privacy of the American
Absolutely.
citizen.
Absolutely. And we've done our best to preserve that.
Senator Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am very pleased that the President stressed that he was keeping the commitment on the International Space Station and our commitment to our international partners. And I was glad you stressed the phenomenal job our international partners have done in helping us through this crisis. My question is, as we are looking toward the long-term future, which we all, I think, appreciate, in the short term, what is the commitment to continuing the medical research, to developing and enhancing the medical research that is being done in the space station, so that we don't sort of put that aside? Because when we do go back to our manned spacecraft, clearly that's going to be a major part of what we tell the American people we want to achieve for quality of life and the ability to do those experiments that cannot be done on Earth, no matter what kind of gravity you try to emulate from space.
No, thank you, Senator. I think the short answer is our commitment to life sciences, physiological research is more focused now than ever before as a consequence of the President's statement and his direction to us. Because the primary objective what we seek to derive off the International Space Station now is a clear understanding of the challenges of long-duration spaceflight expeditionary missions, which are very much akin to the kinds of things we're doing on station right now. Mike Foale and Sasha Kaleri are aboard the station right now as Expedition 8. They're going to be there for the better part of 6.5 months. And as a consequence, what we learn about that experience and the life sciences research they're engaged in and will continue to in the years ahead is going to be the primary focus of what we do. So the medical-derived kind of benefits that come from that for the human effects on astronauts, as well as that which can affect all of us here on Earth as a result of what they find, is going to be a real direct benefit of it and is more intensified now. And what you'll see in the budget is an enhanced position for that quality of research than ever before. And we're really going to refocus everything else we're doing towards that objective.
NASA has a great university consortium where you have carefully gone through the different medical schools and what their area of expertise is. I would just hope that you would start highlighting the things that are done in space. We all know The study of how human bodies react in space is important for putting people on the moon for a longer period of time or staying in space. But the medical research that might result in a significant improvement in the treatment of osteoporosis or breast cancer, those kinds of things, I would hope you could start shipping out to the research institutions what you've gotten from space, and let's start seeing the results, because I think that will, just like these wonderful pictures will build momentum and excitement, I think that also would build momentum and excitement for the continuation of the major financial commitment we're making to space.
Senator, I couldn't agree more. On the 14th of January, the President very specifically outlined the effects on MRIs, CAT scans, cataract detection, all these different things that have derived from this research that we've conducted for the pursuit of space exploration. And we will continue to do much more of that, and directed by him. So we clearly will enhance our efforts to move in that direction. Thank you.
Let me just ask you, in the very near interim, we were going to do our next shuttle, I think you had said in September. Now that date is a little bit off. Do you have a date that you can say would be feasible for us to do the next shuttle, and also make sure, of course, that all of the safety considerations from the Accident Investigation Board are met?
No, we're still targeting that early fall, September, October timeframe. There's a window of about 30 days there, which meet the conditions that are necessary to comply fully with the Accident Investigation Board recommendations and our imposition of procedures, which is it's got to be a daylight launch, and it's got to occur in a way that we see every element and second of the flight as it proceeds until the main engine cutoff. So as a consequence, there are a number of different factors we've got to continue to monitor. And the return to flight task group that we've assembled of 25 experts from management backgrounds, engineering, technical skills, et cetera, have been helping us work through each of the options to implement those set of recommendations, and there are no showstoppers we're seeing for that time frame. That said, I'm not going to be reticent for a second to delay that if there's anything that gets in the way of doing this in a way that assures that we're fit to fly. I'm not going to be driven by a calendar or a date, and that's the general frame that we're looking at. But I think it's critically important that we be looking at a milestone, not a calendar, to drive that set of objectives.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just hope so much that we can start seeing the new medical research results. We all know the old ones, and they've been fabulous. Sure. And I just think it would build excitement if we can bring out more of the new ones to show why we are continuing to the American people.
Stand by. I think with the President's direction on this focus on life sciences in the future, it's impossible to predict what's going to happen, but I think we're going to see some really profound changes on that front as a consequence of really concentrating on human effects, long-duration space flight, physiological consequence that will have derived advantages for the medical community, to be sure.
Be very exciting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman,
Thank you, Senator.
I'll ask just one question to highlight Senator Brownback's statement. Is this on? How many hits did you have on your websites after those landings on Mars?
Thank you, Senator. In the last 27 days, we've had 4 billion hits to the NASA website. All of last year was 2.8 billion. That was 4 times the amount of any other year. So in a span of 27 days, we've already exceeded the annual highest level we'd ever had, and last year was a pretty active year. It was amazing. The overwhelming interest is just phenomenal. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Breaux.
No wonder the computers on Mars crashed. Got an overload problem.
That's true.
2 points. The first one being on the vehicle that we're talking about being the next generation vehicle. We went through this process probably before your time with the X-33, the Venture Star plane that was out on the table, withdrawn, dropped. And then we had the orbital space plane, OSP, that was out there. Companies started looking at it, got excited, got geared up, and that's gone. And now we have the CEV, which is a crew exploration vehicle. I would hope that we decide on what we want to do. I mean, the direction, again, is what I'm concerned about. We start, we stop, we change, and that's got to be very difficult for the private sector to become involved in and to plan and put together consortiums to make these things work. So can you tell us, if you know, Sean, where are we on this third plane that I'm hearing about? I mean, do we have a concept? Do we have more than a concept? Do we have enough to say to companies, go out there and start looking at how to design, test, and build this vehicle? Where are we on that?
Yes, sir. No, there is a little bit of a difference in the example you just used that I'd like to point out just for a second. The X-33, as I understand it, back in the mid to late 90s, was a first attempt, or in fact maybe a second or third attempt, at trying to achieve a horizontal launch, a capacity to fly off a runway and achieve low Earth, beyond low Earth orbit, or in low Earth orbit from that kind of stationary position. It required, in the words of several industry folks that I've talked to, at least 2 inventions and at least 1 suspension of the law of physics in order to do this. And as a consequence, we don't know how to do that yet. This is not dependent upon that. Matter of fact, if anything, the whole approach the President's program is dependent on, that has been really was a dogged issue that we worked through all the way through the 6-month interagency process, was that there be nothing here based on the use of an element called unobtainium or anything else. This is something we got to have the capacity to do, and it's a stretch that's an aggressive application of today's technology, but not something that requires a miracle or an invention. So what you see in the Project Constellation exploration vehicle is a logical extension of the work we did on an orbital spaceplane. In so many ways, there's an awful lot common between the two. The difference is that its objective, its goal, is to go beyond low Earth orbit, whereas the orbital spaceplane would have permitted a lot of different designs in order to simply achieve low Earth orbit to and from International Space Station, 250 to 300 miles
Excuse me
out.
if I interrupt him, how would the CEV be launched?
On the same way that the orbital spaceplane would be, off of an expendable rocket. That's the intent.
Do we have that rocket capacity now?
That's the issue we're going to need to continue to work. And it was the same one we were working on OSP. And I think it really is going to depend on what combination of capabilities do you put on a Project Constellation exploration vehicle in terms of longer duration space flight that may require more lift. And that's something we're going to need to look at. Well,
when will NASA be ready to say to industry who will be involved in developing and building this ship, here's what we want you to do?
Pretty quick. I think the objective was on OSP was to look at them responding to a proposal here during the course of this calendar year, and aggressively if we could have awarded something by August. We're going to need to spend the next 6 months with them and everybody else, commercial ideas, the whole bit, trying to put together a set of baseline requirements, which again are derivatives from the OSP. We're not starting with a clean sheet of paper. This is a direct extension of what's involved there, and I suspect that many of the same designs that the industry was looking at will have great applications here as well. And so as a consequence, we're going to do this collaboratively with them in order to find what are the best approaches to this and solicit other commercial ideas that may exist out there.
Okay, the second point I would ask about is the concern about the start, stop, start, and the continuity of the workforce. I mean, we down, as you know quite well, in Michoud in New Orleans, have this huge facility with thousands of employees, and my real concern as I look at the President's plan that we'll probably have as much as a 5-year gap after the shuttle is completed its work and the time then we start with this new CEV vehicle that is now only in the very minute planning stages. What do we do to keep the continuity of the workforce? I'm really concerned. These folks, if they lose the work, they're gone. You have to restart, restop. I mean, how do we address that continuity of service that is so necessary to get what you need to accomplish?
Yes, sir. No, it is a critical factor that we really need to work the details of that have got a few years out. And it's not to say we're not going to start right now trying to sort through what those consequences are. At least for the next 4 years, you're looking at production of the external tank, et cetera, that are necessary to fly shuttle. There are a number of different options that would look at shuttle-derived approaches for lift capability for the Project Constellation exploration vehicle. That's not yet determined, and we're looking for creative ideas from the industry to do that. I'm not convinced there's going to be a gap or a hiatus there, because again, part of what is in the dialogue with Senator Nelson a little bit earlier, what we're pursuing is an acquisition strategy of a spiral development, of which the first spiral of the Project Constellation exploration vehicle, unmanned, will be launched as early as '08 and a little bit later this decade. So potentially we could see a lot of aggressive, heel-toe kind of transition occurring, depending on how we do this. And we're going to have to factor that in when we make determinations of the right way to do this. So, a lot is not yet determined in terms of what the transition looks like 5 and 6 years down the road. We're really concentrating on this coming year in order to position ourselves to make sure that the answers for that transition 5 and 6 years down the road are sound.
Well, I'm glad you're looking at it, because it's obviously very, very crucial to keep that supply of the workforce there, doing something. They're not just going to be able to sit for a gap of several years. Thank you very much, John.
No, thank you, Senator. Again, I think to look at the Project Constellation vehicle as a natural extension, not a new thing from what OSP work did. That was a lot of valuable time spent to do that. Worked out exceptionally well. We learned a lot from that experience, and we're just naturally evolving it to a more expansive effort that has a mission objective beyond low Earth orbit. It draws on the very same kind of capabilities, no doubt about it.
Thanks. Senator Allen's next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator O'Keefe, it is always a pleasure to listen to you, and I think your leadership, enthusiasm, and adherence to sound fiscal policies gives us some confidence, gives me a great deal of confidence in your ability as you go through these, you formulate this strategic plan, but then also as you answer very probative and logical questions for my colleagues, how you will adapt as you learn more. The steps in the strategic plan are sequential. You meet each goal, and from there take on the next step of that long-range goal. And it is important to have a mission and a goal as opposed to just floating around like loose seaweed in the tide. You actually have certain missions, and I think that is important. You're going downfield. That's important. The workforce issues that Senator Breaux brought up generally with NASA are very important. I've been one to, I'm going to ask you questions on aeronautics, but you also look at the fewer and fewer engineers with aeronautical engineering degrees, and we see that in a lot of areas in our country. That can be made up from time to time by bringing in people from other countries, which is great, and you all have done it, and that's to be commended. However, just like Senator Breaux said, though, is if you curtail any of these areas, it's not as if you just snap your fingers and all of a sudden there are aeronautical engineers or those who have the capabilities, and it also slows down your implementation as you're trying to get those folks up to speed, working as a productive team. And clearly, as you saw the celebrations there, you could tell you didn't know what each was doing, but there were certain teams that had certain aspects or components of those landings that, all right, great, the balloons or the airbags have deployed. That's what we were supposed to get done. Now it landed, great, that's wonderful. Let's see if it opens. Each one has a certain responsibility. You do work as a team. Now, insofar as your aerospace technology enterprise, the aeronautics enterprise, and so forth, Lee Forsgren forwarded me, and I think probably other members of the committee, your January 15th letter to Senator McCain. And in reading through it, and I'm going to ask you to put some more meat on the bones if you could, theoretically it all sounds very, very good. I like that the aeronautics enterprise is going to emphasize the importance of aeronautics research and related technologies for our country's civil and defense interests. They'll perform research, develop and validate innovative high payoff aeronautics and related technologies. That'll enhance our security through partnerships, obviously with the Department of Defense, the FAA, and work in partnership with industry and also academia to get this transfer. Same sort of things that Senator Hutchison was talking about more in the space exploration, but having the applicability to real life, real present concerns we have, whether it's in medical sciences or other. Now, my concern with this is, will this reorganization of the aerospace technology enterprise, what will be the impact of that on the aeronautics budget? And do you see the new aeronautics enterprise participating in this new vision? There is some carryover from aeronautics, obviously, into space exploration as well. So those are two questions. First, what will this initiative have as an impact on the aeronautics budget, and how will they be involved in the overall new vision?
Yes, sir. First and foremost, I want to thank you for raising the workforce challenges that we're facing, and to thank the Senate for enacting and passing on S-610, Senator Voinovich's bill, that right before everybody went out of session in December. It's in the House now. They're due to call it up pretty quickly. I'm advised here this week that gives us the kinds of tools necessary to recruit, retain the kinds of skill mixes you're talking about. We've got a professional opportunity here. And in fact, I'm just told now that S-610 is on the House floor right now. So, this is a year and a half in the making. Thank you very much for passing it. It was a critical piece of legislation that we've really been wrestling with in order to get the kind of tools necessary to recruit and retain the workforce capabilities that are there. So it is a major achievement, and if we get it enacted, the President will sign it rapidly. I can see that coming right away. In terms of the aerospace and aeronautics enterprise approach, it is no accident that the day after the President's vision announcement, we specifically looked at establishing an aeronautics enterprise to make sure that concentration focus dominantly resides within what we do in the agency. Because so much of what we're engaged in, as you very accurately stated, is applied to a range of different capabilities in the space exploration activity, as well as the civil aeronautics kind of applications we're engaged in. Airspace management, continued efforts. As a matter of fact, in another 3 weeks, we've got a demonstration of the hypersonic X-43 that will be followed through in terms of what our aeronautics efforts are producing now. And the objective will be to, again, use the materials research, the aeronautic engineering capabilities there at Langley, at Ames, at the Glenn Research Center, the very prominent aeronautics centers that we have within that community, to continue to contribute not only to this set of vision objectives for U.S. space exploration the President's enunciated, but also to our fundamental requirements for aeronautics, which is part of our name. Finally, residing or putting the NASA Engineering and Safety Center at Langley is not there by accident. That's the center that really has the highest concentration of aerospace engineering expertise for materials research and a range of different capabilities that is necessary to examine trends, patterns, et cetera, on a wide range of aeronautic as well as space flight capabilities that every center, every program has the opportunity now to draw from that expertise that's resonant right there. So it is very consciously established at that location and very specifically there for the purpose of not only retaining those capabilities, but using them to solve not only aeronautics challenges, but the range of space exploration issues that we're looking at across the board. So it's going to have a very cohesive role, I think, in the larger NASA program objectives that we've articulated.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll be looking forward to working with you. I know the budget will be coming out and seeing how it works. You also should be looking for a letter from Senator Dodd and myself, not just to you, but to all the everyone from Defense to FAA, TSA, NOAA, and others insofar as aeronautics, because I think the I know the acting chairman, Senator Brownback, and others really recognize the importance of our preeminence in aeronautics, and we cannot lose that preeminence for our security as well as for jobs here in this country. And
yes, sir.
I look forward
Thank you.
to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Administrator.
Senator Dorgan.
Mr. O'Keefe,
Right, sir.
first of all, let me congratulate NASA on the recent successes. I think it's breathtaking to watch what is happening with the landings on Mars. Second, let me say that when you were nominated by the President, I didn't have the foggiest idea whether you would do well or do poorly. But I must tell you that I'm very pleased that I supported your nomination. I think you personally have done an excellent job under some very difficult circumstances.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sure you could probably point out where you might have done better, but at least as an observer, I think you've provided strong leadership at a time when it's needed, and I wanted to say that to you because I did support your nomination, and am pleased I did so.
Thank you, Senator.
I also believe that when a nation stops exploring, it stops progressing. So I believe that exploration, and I believe the mission of NASA is important. But I do want to ask about the President's proposals. You indicated that they were developed through interagency task forces and so on. Was there any other outreach, any other inquiry by NASA with experts around the country about what do they think we should be looking at 10, 20, and 40 years from now?
Yes, sir. The interagency process we conducted internally also drew on the opportunity to meet with various members of Congress who had very specific goals and objectives they thought should be enunciated, as well as the very helpful hearings that this committee and your counterpart committee in the House conducted to really examine what are the alternative views of what the vision and strategy objectives should be. We heard it, we listened, understood that, and also went out and solicited other views as well. But not to leave it at that. One of the things that the President, I think, was particularly focused on was to assure that some of the helpful suggestions that members offered was that a commission be set up for the purpose of assuring that we solicit more broadly what those implementation strategies are. And Senator Brownback and others were very instrumental in advancing that particular objective. We heard that. The President was struck by that notion of saying, let's assemble a commission. So Pete Aldridge and the commission that will be charged here in the very short number of days ahead to begin looking at implementation strategies. How do we look at commercial, international participation, a range of other factors, workforce issues, as Senator Allen raised, others that need to be factored in as we move forward to accomplish this objective. That's what this commission will be doing. We'll be supporting it, participating in it. That is due to provide its findings here by this summer. So we're working this real time and moving ahead with the strategy and the program the President will unveil on Monday as part of the President's budget program and be informed by the views that come externally as well from the Aldridge Commission.
And while I said I support space exploration and believe it's important, I believe a country needs to continue exploring, it is expensive, costly. And I don't want to be a wise guy, but I must say we've been promised the moon before, particularly in fiscal policy. We, as you know, from the announcement this week, have a $477 billion deficit this year, but it's really $630 billion because the 477 counts the Social Security Trust Fund. So we have the largest deficit in human history. It's a very significant problem. And so the question, I think, for all of us is not just the goal, but how do we pay for this? How much is it going to cost? And I observed that at least in the initial portion, you're talking about reprogramming $11 billion, I believe, in the 5 years from the current NASA budget or current NASA expected appropriations. Can you tell me, my expectation was, and from previous testimony, that we were pretty tight. I mean, we've seen budget cuts in NASA, and so how do we reprogram $11 billion without substantially affecting many other critical things that NASA said it needs to do? Can you talk us through that fiscal policy, or
Yes,
I guess the financing issue?
No, thank you, Senator, for the very important question. As a general budget strategy, let me assure you that the President's budget, when it arrives here next week, will follow through on the commitment he made and has articulated as a discretionary spending increase of less than 4% with the objective as well over the next 5 years of driving down the deficit projection to half of what it is today. So that's the overarching economic policy, and the program that we are engaged in and that he has directed us to follow through is part of that plan. We are a component of it. The specific aspect that's in your packet, I believe, so that this doesn't turn into an eye chart for you, is in this specific 5-year plan, the numbers that will be supported in the President's budget that we'll see in great detail next week supports a transition or a transformation, if you will, more towards the exploration missions that he's directed, and then in the out years assumes not more than the rate of inflation for an increase beyond that. So we've really put this through the sanity check to assure that we're not passing a balloon note off into the next decade, and instead looking at what it will require in that transition. So all the elements of the plan were developed very specifically to conduct the transition and then ultimate transformation of capabilities to move more in the direction of the exploration missions he's directed. And it fits within the parameters of the overall economic strategy I talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah, I want to talk with you more about that at some other time, but I might say that the 2 landings on Mars demonstrate the incredible value of unmanned space exploration as well. I mean, there's much to be gleaned from that. And I would also just finally like to say this. I hope, while I complimented you, and my colleagues I'm sure have the same feelings about your stewardship, I hope you will pass our compliments along to the men and women of NASA. When I saw that film, I mean, I wasn't in the room, and you were, when they discovered that they had landed Spirit successfully on the surface of Mars. It is an extraordinary technical achievement. I mean, almost one that's hard for us to fathom because we're not scientists. But I hope you'll relay our congratulations to the men and women who work for NASA as well.
No, thank you, sir. It was a heart-stopping experience on both occasions, particularly when you see the animation of that thing bouncing. I mean, that was enough to stop you cold all the way through this. It's an amazing feat, and one that it's staggering to grip the fact that this is 100 million miles away, and we're communicating with these 2 capabilities that are just absolutely extraordinary, and doing it in a way that we dared not dream it would have been this successful.
And especially following such a devastating tragedy that I'm sure affected personally everyone who works for NASA, to have this success was really critically important, but it describes again how unmanned space exploration can be very helpful to us, and it describes the technical capability and the spirit of the folks that work for NASA.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it very much. We'll pass that along.
I want to add my support to those comments, too. Also, maybe give me a lot more security in the airbags in my car when I saw that taking place. Senator Ensign.
It's the same technology. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's the very same idea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a little background, so you know where I come from personally, when I was in high school, I was one of those kids who wanted to be an astronaut and wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and ended up being an alternate to the Air Force Academy, so didn't pursue that. But always been fascinated with space. Loved the work the Hubble Space Telescope has done. Followed NASA's accomplishments. I can't tell you how many of the launches of the Space Shuttle that I watched. I remember as a kid watching all of the Apollo. So it's been a real fascination for me personally over the years. Now, having said that, in the last several years, and I think that the space station has been a big part of this, I've become more concerned about what NASA is doing. The space station, original budget was projected to be somewhere around $8 billion. My numbers are correct, somewhere in there.
Yeah, the history of this is tough to trace in the course of the last couple of years. I've been there. It is a firm number. We know where it's going, but what it originally started at, it's been devolved several times and redesigned, and I can hardly even figure out what the original idea was
I understand
anymore.
some of the politics and working with some of the other countries and dumbing down some of our science and various things that we've had to do, and budgetary things and the problems that have happened with the space station, I think illustrate not necessarily that it was the scientists' fault, for that, or part of it Congress's fault, doing budget cuts, and sometimes, and I actually have one of the Nevadans that works on this. I used to ride on the airplane with him talking about it all the time. He used to come back here, and he was hired to evaluate the problems with it. The bottom line is that the projections are usually here on big government programs, and certainly this is one of those, and the reality when it comes in, the numbers are usually to use a scientific term, a quantum amount above whatever the initial projections are.
And especially when you're talking about vision things, because you have no idea what the costs are going to be, and we have no idea what other kinds of outdoor or outside influences the Congress may go through at the time to affect that. And that's what happened with the space station over the years. When you introduce humans into spaceflight, we know that the cost dramatically goes up. There was a comment about, if people were on Mars today, in that the benefits that we would have, well, they wouldn't be able to smell it, they wouldn't be able to touch it, they wouldn't be able to feel it, and their eyes aren't as good as what the robot's eyes are. And I guess the point that I'm making is that, as a country, I think that we do have to reevaluate the idea of putting people in these projects because of the enormous costs. I believe in continuing space exploration, but I think that we really do have to take a very hard look at the cost benefit of having people up there, and does it really benefit us, as a species? Even our curiosity, does it really benefit us that much going forward compared to the huge, huge difference in costs that it's going to take to get people there, along with the risks? And speaking of the risks, every time, people die, and people will die in space exploration, there's no way to stop it. There are risks involved. We saw that last year. Well, when that happens, then we reevaluate budgets, we put things on hold, we stop. If one of those rovers went up there and it crashed, well, it'd be a scientific setback, but it wouldn't be a tragedy where the whole country would be saying, put us into the space program. And I just want to put that out as a cautionary look as you are going forward. I appreciate the President's vision for this, but, not to be a naysayer, but I think that some people have to raise the voices and ask the tough questions. What is the benefit of putting man, as part of this? So I guess that would be my question for you. Are you all weighing that huge cost that it's going to take to put men in versus the benefit?
Absolutely. No, thank you, Senator. It's a very important question, and one that I think really has to be wrestled with, not just once or trying to be definitive in one circumstance, but every single day we've got to put it through the sanity check that we are designing missions and approaches that can only be accomplished by human involvement. And if we can't, then we really ought to be doing it more robotically. And I think that's the approach, the balance you'll see in the President's program here. Let me just give you a couple of data points, though, of what's involved. We talked a little bit with Senator Wyden a little bit earlier of a cost-benefit analysis approach.
Can I interrupt you just real quick? You said that only could be
accomplished by humans.
In other words, that's where you're looking, not just what's best. In other words, best by robots or whatever. It's only what could be accomplished with humans that you would have humans involved with.
Indeed, because there's a cognitive capacity that we can't build into a robot, hard as we might try. There's also some efficiencies that go with this, that the cost-benefit analysis that, again, Senator Wyden prompted us to think about and that we'll have available here in a few weeks really goes through, which is, again, if you look at this Mars mission on just one of them, rover, Spirit, or Opportunity, either one, the overall scientific package over the 90 to 120 days it's going to be really engaged in the scientific pursuit, geological, robotic capabilities, and so forth, could be accomplished by a human being in one day. Okay? It's just because mobility, capacity to move around, do things, make judgments at the time. We get 2 weeks worth of time probably on Spirit that we're going to spend working out the mechanical challenges of a computer glitch, to be just real blunt about it, that occurred on Spirit last week. That's the kind of thing that could, I don't know, arguably be settled very rapidly with someone there looking at it. It really takes a different condition. That said, we can't put anybody there. We don't have the capacity to put someone on that planet right now. They couldn't stand the physiological consequence of taking a trip, much less being there. We don't know how to do that yet. But there are a whole range of things that we could accomplish differently and could do it more efficiently and could only accomplish with human beings if that were the case. Hubble is a perfect example of this. John Grunsfeld, sitting right here, is the chief scientist of NASA. He's been to Hubble twice. And the only reason why that capability continues to operate today is the servicing missions that were conducted by human beings. And indeed, as good an astronomer as he is, as good a scientist as he is, as good an astronaut as he is, his primary qualification for the task, given the fact that all the controls on the Hubble are on the left side, is he's a southpaw. His capacity to be able to use a catcher's mitt to make adjustments on this turned out to be one of the greatest attributes going. We don't have an autonomous robotic capacity to do that. And as a consequence, looking at the risk that we took for him and his colleagues to go there in the past are now determined to be higher than we should have ever accepted, given what we know from the Columbia Accident Investigation Board report and all the recommendations it levied for us to fly safely in the future. And as a consequence, those kinds of missions, even though they can only be done by a human to do this properly, are the kinds of things we've got to dispense with, and we're making the choice about because of the risk involved. Those are the kind of gut checks we have to make, but also compare it to the cases where, when we have the capacity, discern very carefully when you can only bring human capacity to bear to get the outcome you're looking for.
Thank you,
Senator. It's a very important set of questions and one we take very seriously, and I appreciate your inquiry to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Keefe, I believe my colleague from Oregon, Senator Wyden, may have already touched upon this issue. I think it's, you should know both of us have been inundated by concerned Oregonians who've wondered if their privacy has been violated, and it has to do with the data mining project that NASA undertook after 9/11. I think it's understandable to Americans that all government agencies were trying to figure out how can we help. And yet many are wondering if the airlines they rode on, Northwest in particular, JetBlue and other, cooperated in a way that compromised privacy of individuals. In fact, I understand that JetBlue is subject to some class action lawsuit, and I wonder if you have some thoughts about that. But I wonder what steps, having undertaken this, NASA can give in terms of assurance that it took steps to protect privacy, and I'm wondering what you learned, having protected privacy. What then did you learn about protecting national security in airline travel? Frankly, I had never realized you were in airline travel security, but this was all new to my constituents, but it hit the press and created a firestorm.
Yes, thank you, Senator. This is an incident that, again, we are very conscious of, the Privacy Act and its implications. And once the data was released to NASA by Northwest Airlines, I'm advised that there are two things that really mitigated against any real proliferation of the information. First one was our security procedures we used. They were 18 disks that contained the information over a 3-month span. And it was vaulted, as in put in a deep, dark safe when it was used. There were a very specific number of folks who were working on it, very small number, who were working on the analysis. And it leads to the second issue that basically conquered the reason why we couldn't really contribute much, is that the data compression that Northwest Airlines uses for its information, we can only extract from that 3 months of data 2 days worth after a year worth of trying to redesign the information just to download it, and it yielded nothing. Okay. So as a consequence, just the technique they were using at Northwest and other airlines, I suspect, for how they use the information is not easily transferable to anybody else, and it sure wasn't to NASA. We were asked to get into this because we are engaged in a number of airspace management tech approaches, various, again, high computation kind of analysis efforts that have gone on, and there were those who thought there may be some way that we could help in this case. Turned out we couldn't. We turned over all the data back to Northwest Airlines. It was not distributed beyond the very limited number of analysts who were engaged in it, and it proved to be something that was way too hard to climb because of the nature of the data that was compressed in the first place. The privacy issues are terribly important. It's ones we want to remind our folks of constantly. That said, I want to be able to ensure and encourage our people to think about how we apply our technology towards the kind of activities that would thwart anybody from wanting to use a commercial airline against any of us in the future.
Well, I appreciate you speaking of it. I know that my constituents are supporters of NASA, so am I. but we're concerned about this. And what I take from your answer and also from your office's response to my letter to you about this, and I appreciate that response, that no privacy was violated in a way that resulted in damages to citizens. And obviously it awaits a jury to say whether any airline is liable, but at least from your perspective, no damages were inflicted upon individuals by the loss of their privacy.
Yes, sir. That's the information I have, and it's that's based on the investigation we conducted to see how far this went. That's the findings that our folks have come back with in terms of what the containment of the information was in the first place. We're very mindful of that. In this post-9/11 world, we're all learning different ways that we've got to protect information like this.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and also want to second the comments of many of my colleagues who are curious about this, the manned projects to the moon again and to Mars, wanting to be supportive, also needing to balance budgets on Earth, and wanting to know what is the value that we can glean from actually undertaking the risk and the cost of putting human beings up there. Is there a cost-benefit relationship that we can defend to our people? And if there is, I think America is an exploring nation and wants to know more of what's out there. But those are the questions we need to have asked, and I think you're telling us today you're prepared to answer them in the near future.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Senator. That's exactly it. And the President's budget, I think, will address many of those issues, and in the context of his overall economic policy, which is well within the context of this.
Thank you, and thank you, Administrator. You've been very candid and thoughtful with your comments. It's been a delightful hearing that you've shown. You can get a real sense of the feel of people up here. I would add, I'm delighted to see the President shooting to cut the budget deficit in half in 5 years and reprioritize, because to me that's compassionate conservative ideology. There's enough money in the budget, it's just not programmed in the right places. I think we ought to shoot to balance the budget in 7, which is a target we've moved towards in the past, and something I think that we ought to engage again, and yet still do things like what you're directing to do, and show the people that when you're getting nearly a $2 trillion budget, there's enough funds there to do things. It just frequently is not in the right places where you want it, and priorities change, and you need to shift money around. And that's the tough work of governing that we're going to need to show that we actually can and will do things like that. And you don't need to raise taxes. Indeed, you need to keep the economy robust by keeping taxes low to get these things done. So we've got our job cut out for us as well. You've laid out a great vision for us, and you've been very candid in your thoughts. I do encourage you to meet with members privately, as I know you do, because a lot of people will continue to have other thoughts and comments. Thank you for your presentation today.
Appreciate it very much. And your summary comment, I want to associate myself with exactly. That's precisely where the President's going, and that's precisely what this program incorporates, and it does show those trade-offs and stays within the fiscal discipline that he's imposed on all of us. And so I'm extremely heartened by this direction, and one that, again, I appreciate the reception of the committee as well to hear it out. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll now have a second panel. Dr. Louis Friedman, Executive Director of the Planetary Society, the Honorable Neil Lane, University Professor, Senior Fellow of the Baker Institute at Rice University, Dr. Howard McCurdy is Professor of Department of Public Administration, American University, and Mr. Richard Tumlinson, founder of Space Frontier Foundation. We're going to have gentlemen, all of you at the table. We will get going as quickly as you're there. Gentlemen, I'm sorry we've dragged on a bit, but as you can tell, there's a lot of interest. We had a lot of member participation, and it's a good news story instead of the bad news story we've generally had. Dr. Friedman, let's start with your testimony. We will receive each of your full written statements into the record as if presented. I would encourage you to summarize as best as possible on the key points to make sure that we get really what is the heart and thrust of what you're after. Dr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be back here. I used to work on the staff of this committee, and it's always a pleasure to come back.
Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the National Space Policy Directive issued 2 weeks ago by President Bush. Both its title, Renewed Spirit of Discovery, and its stated goal to extend human presence across the solar system capture a spirit that we at the Planetary Society have long advocated. The new policy directive states clearly that the human space program will no longer flounder without a compelling goal and will finally set its sights on other worlds. Understanding and extending life beyond Earth is the only purpose that justifies the cost and risk of human spaceflight. Restoring exploration as the raison d'etre of the space program is a welcome development to those of us motivated by science and exploration. The goal and vision are terrific. Setting goals, providing a broad vision is the President's job and that of you and your colleagues. The challenge in question now is implementation. Other space visions have turned out to be counterproductive in advancing space exploration, even those with noble aims. The shuttle, the space station, the 1989 Moon-Mars initiative, for example. A great deal of public, political, and international constituency building will be required. The welcome first steps in this new policy include retiring the shuttle quickly after completing assembly of the International Space Station, separating crew and cargo, not just in launch vehicles, but for transportation to the International Space Station and for launching exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit, building a new crew vehicle that would provide crew transportation for missions beyond low Earth orbit, and conducting robotic exploration across the solar system for scientific purposes and to support human exploration. This is particularly welcome, for the policy is not limited to the Moon and Mars. It supports science even to understand the history of the solar system. We have previously advocated all of these steps. Funds for vehicles and human missions beyond Earth orbit are not yet allocated. The projected NASA budget may be inadequate for dealing with all the technical challenges for conducting human missions on the Moon and sending them on to Mars. But ways to lessen the cost of human exploration of Mars, including from international partnerships, should be learned during this period. The Planetary Society urges that a robotic Mars outpost be set up at a potential human landing site for emplacing robotic infrastructure that can increase reliability and safety and lower cost for human missions. A Mars outpost is an appropriate goal for the International Robotics Mars programs in the next decade. Cost is determined by requirements. The technical steps cited above, the Mars outposts, they can reduce the cost of sending humans to Mars. Conversely, Martian exploration will be more expensive if it includes extensive lunar objectives, prohibitively so if they include developing permanent lunar bases or open-ended exploration for speculative lunar resources. Much rhetoric and even some of the official statements accompanying the directive have been confused or misleading on this subject. One even called for launching spacecraft from the Moon into the solar system. There's probably no more expensive way that could be devised to reach Mars. Fortunately, the President's policy itself does not call for these things. It says only that we should use lunar exploration activities to further science, develop and test new approaches, technologies, and systems, and including the use of lunar and other space resources, an emphasis, to support sustained human exploration to Mars and other destinations. The cost for any proposed use of lunar resources should be estimated and compared with alternatives. The topic must be subject to economic analysis before any commitment to such a program is made. While the United States and Russia have been to the Moon many times, it is a target of international interest. Europe has a mission to the Moon right now. Japan, India, and China all have missions in development underway. International cooperation is supported in the policy directive, and we urge that the United States with other spacefaring nations cooperate and coordinate their robotic lunar missions. This could pave the way for international human crews missions to the Moon and to Mars that would lower the cost in the long run. The Planetary Society co-founder, Carl Sagan, wrote, "There's plenty of housework to be done here on Earth, and our commitment to it must be steadfast. But we are the kind of species that requires a frontier for fundamental biological reasons. Every time humanity stretches itself and turns a new corner, it receives a jolt of productive vitality that can carry it for centuries. There is a new world next door, and we know how to get there. Only at Mars will we begin to learn whether humankind is limited to a single planet. Only at Mars will humans be able to investigate the key questions about life. These are the great human purposes for which we send humans to space. The lure of Mars was dramatically revealed by the enormous public interest and excitement that attended the landings of the Mars rovers this past month, in which we saw graphic evidence of this morning. The presence of 5 robot emissaries from planet Earth now exploring that other world. Imagine if those robots were us.
Very good and a very provocative statement. Dr. Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was in government, it was always a great pleasure to appear before this committee as it is today. It gives me an opportunity to thank you and the members of the committee for your strong support for science, for research, for education, and for space. It's my pleasure now to work with Senator Hutchison in Texas. She's doing a wonderful job to emphasize the importance of science, research, and education in Texas. I also am very appreciative of the chance to join this distinguished panel here to talk about the President's space plan. President Bush has outlined a space plan with 3 goals: complete the space station, build a new human spacecraft, and return Americans to the moon by the year 2020. So it's important to ask, I think, are these the right goals? Is the plan, including the budget, likely to accomplish these goals? Well, I believe the administration's 3 goals, and I would add a 4th, to strengthen NASA's world-class science and science education programs, including robotic exploration of space. These could provide a bold vision for the U.S. space effort. Science has been much the heart and soul of NASA. The images and knowledge we've obtained from the Hubble Space Telescope and many other space-based telescopes have stunned astronomers who are accustomed to spectacular images and discoveries. NASA's planetary science missions have given us close-up images of even far-off planets and their satellites, asteroids, comets, and now the Spirit and Opportunity rovers soon will be strolling on the surface of Mars, sniffing around, looking for water, and making history. NASA's programs to study our sun, its magnetic field, the solar wind of radiation that comes our way and creates the beautiful aurora over Alaska and our northern states, provides important space weather forecasts that help us avoid the disruptions of communication that also result from solar activity. NASA's satellite observations of Earth help us understand changes in land use, climate change, and weather prediction, and help protect us from natural disasters. NASA also supports world-class laboratory research in its centers and its universities all across the nation. This includes the unique experiments on the space station of the effects of zero gravity on human physiology. Science must remain one of the highest priorities for the agency, in my view. And unless science is one of the principal goals of the new space initiative, then science will be relegated to the status of always in need of protection as opposed to being enhanced. That would be a mistake. So with science included, we have the makings of a bold vision, but a vision cannot simply be a dream. In order to be credible, it really must be achievable. So let's look at each of these goals. Should we complete the space station? Without question, we should complete the space station, honoring our commitment to our international partners, as well as conducting the experiments and gaining experience that will be needed for trips out of Earth's orbit. Should we build a new human spacecraft? Well, clearly, it is essential that we modernize our fleet of human spacecraft. The Space Shuttle has been an extraordinary vehicle, but it is expensive to operate and it still uses old technology. An important element of President Clinton's 1994 national space policy was to upgrade the shuttle and design and build a new vehicle to replace it. The shuttle upgrade should continue, and it's time to get on with building a new vehicle. Should we return humans to the moon? Well, I think we should go back to the moon, perhaps even spend some time on the moon. Question is when and how. When it is of sufficiently high priority for the American people to spend the money, and how through expanded international cooperation, not only with our traditional partners in space, but with new partners, such as China or India, Brazil perhaps, and maybe others. Should we enhance the NASA science programs? I've already spoken to this. I think without a rich portfolio of scientific research in centers and universities, and without robotic missions to launch new telescopes, to monitor the health of the Earth and explore the surfaces of planets and satellites, our much more costly human spaceflight missions will be little more than precarious adventures. Finally, is the budget adequate? Well, I think the President has described a bold plan, but he's not yet provided the architecture or the means. The 5% a year growth the President promises in the NASA budget certainly comes as a relief to an agency that has had many years of budget disappointments and has had to cut back important projects and programs. But the plan the President has described likely will cost much more than that, I think even in the early years. Thus, it is important for the administration to lay out the estimated total costs and provide a roadmap to show the American people where we're going and what it's going to cost to get there. Mr. Chairman, in my written testimony, I raise a number of specific concerns by way of posing questions about all of these issues, but I will not repeat those here today. So in conclusion, I would support a real increase in the NASA budget if the science programs, including robotic exploration of space, are strengthened, if the White House and the Congress, and let me emphasize, if the White House and the Congress will support the necessary reorganization within NASA that will be required to begin the development of a plan to return humans in the moon and beyond. It's not easy to reorganize an agency, and the administrator is going to need all the help he can possibly give. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. Dr. McCurdy, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to come before the committee and share my insights into NASA as an institution. If this initiative is taken seriously, it will have a transforming effect on NASA as an institution. To put that in context, think of the situation that existed in May of 1961 when President John F. Kennedy set out the goal of landing humans on the moon, returning them safely to Earth, and doing that by the end of the decade. At that time, there wasn't anybody in NASA who knew how to do it. NASA lacked the capacity to manage large projects. They didn't have the necessary technology. They didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have the personnel. And yet, 8 years later, Americans returned safely from the moon. In a similar sense, this event challenges NASA in deep and profound ways. Can it be done? Well, in theory, yes. Think of the Apollo objective in this way. The Apollo objective had not just one objective, but two. The first was to accomplish the technical objective of taking humans to the moon and returning them safely. But the administration and the Congress also imposed a second requirement, that it be done within 8 years, a severe schedule constraint that led to all sorts of technological advances and decisions within the space program. Now, in a similar way, this objective asks NASA to do two things. It asks NASA to send humans and robots to the moon and Mars, not on a schedule this time, but within severe cost constraints. In essence, to do it for about what the agency receives today in its annual budget. In the 1960s, NASA was able to accomplish the twin goals of reliability and schedule. And now it's being asked to accomplish the twin goals of reliability and cost. Is NASA, as presently constituted, capable of doing this? In my opinion, it is not, at least not on the human spaceflight side. This will be a transformational event for NASA if it carries it out. NASA has suffered terribly over the past 30 years from the drift that's been imposed on the human spaceflight program. And you can also learn by examining the work of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board that there are difficulties within NASA's human spaceflight culture. It's not the same agency that existed in the 1960s. So these are things that will have to change in order for NASA to be able to do it. Do the seeds of this reform exist within NASA? Well, I think they do historically, but there's no guarantee that they're likely to grow and flower. In two areas in particular. First, there is still the memory of the Apollo years and the techniques that were used at that time. And secondly, great advances have been made in the robotics programs over the last 30 years. You know, we're not just going to learn from the robotics program how to fly machines, but we're going to learn from the robotics program how to manage programs that are low cost. Consider this. The current Spirit Opportunity mission Mars is costing 1/5 of what we spent to send 2 Viking landers to the surface of the planet in 1976. Great advances in technology have been made, but also great advances in organization. So I would suggest to the Congress, if you're asking the question, what can you do to help NASA make this transformation, that as much as possible, you learn from that experience and impose it on NASA. I'll give you a couple ideas, and there's more in my written testimony. One, make cost a goal. Make it a goal in the same sense that President Kennedy made schedule a goal in the 1960s. We know from the robotics program that when NASA has such goals, it can hold to them and accomplish them. That's been proven with Spirit, the Opportunity, with Pathfinder, Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous, and other areas as well. Second, restore NASA's in-house technical capability. This may mean much more extensive in-house construction of spacecraft. Frankly, good scientists and engineers don't stay sharp by monitoring government contracts. They stay sharp by working on the hardware itself. I'd also suggest that you look to the robotics programs and also to areas in private industry where industrialists and government employees have developed very small teams that are able to complete complex projects under severe cost constraints. It's not necessary to recreate Project Apollo. Project Apollo worked because NASA imported from the U.S. Air Force techniques known as systems management. In the same way, if it's going to make these new initiatives work, they will need to import from industry and from their own robotics and space science areas low-cost techniques that have been developing over the past 10 to 20 years. There is an experience base there. So can NASA do it with its present organization and institution? I think not. But does history give us confidence that it could transform itself in such a way that this would be possible? And I think that's true. If 20 or 30 years from now humans stand on Mars and robots with them, NASA will no more resemble the institution that exists today than the NASA of 1969 resembled the NASA of 1961. Thank you.
I hope it's not 20 or 30 years before we have people standing on Mars. It's much sooner than that. Mr. Tomlinson, thank you very much, Dr. McCurdy, for your testimony. Mr. Tomlinson, welcome back.
Welcome. Thank you. Senator Brownback, Senator Hutchison, underappreciated staffers. I am really thrilled to be back here so soon. A few months ago, I sat in this room. I made one prediction that sometime this year, an American would fly in space. They wouldn't be a government employee, and they wouldn't do it on a government vehicle. I'm happy to say that the same day that America was looking backwards at the Wright brothers demonstration, famed aircraft designer Burt Rutan broke the sound barrier with his prototype rocket vehicle. That prediction is on track, and I stick by it at this point. At the same time, I continue to call that we have been making for many years in the space frontier movement, that we return to the moon, that we scuttle the shuttle, that we move away from the space station, and that we set our sights on Mars with the goal of permanent human settlement. For many years, by the way, the Space Frontier Foundation has been holding Return to the Moon conferences. Our 5th will be this summer. I wish the senator from Nevada was here because it's going to be in beautiful downtown Las Vegas, which, by the way, is a city that couldn't have been created by robots. I want to agree with the last speaker that as currently constituted, by the way, I should say, strangely, I was invited to the president's remarks. I sat about 20 feet away from him while he made the announcement, and I looked in my fellow Texan's eyes and I studied him for the entire speech. I believe that he believes what he was saying. I believe that he was sincere about it. What I have difficulty with is how we will realize it. And I agree with the last speaker that NASA, as currently constituted, cannot pull this off. Forget the moon, forget Mars, forget the space frontier out there. The greatest frontier facing NASA right now is itself. NASA is caught in a self-perpetuating loop of cultural traditions and inefficiencies and systems that maximize waste and maximize cost. I want to give you an example. This is a carabiner. It's a little device that mountain climbers use around the world every day. They hang from them, they trust their lives to them. Astronauts also use these same devices to tether themselves to the space station. Now, you can go to REI or sporting goods shops and buy this device for about $20. NASA, on the other hand, pays roughly somewhere over $1,000 for the same object right now. Now, why is that? It's not a case of some company ripping off NASA. It is a system of cost plus rewards. It is a system of paperwork rather than products. It is a not invented here mentality and a distrust of the private sector to provide such goods. The person who sells this to NASA has to create a stack of paper that takes weeks and weeks to fill out, that goes all the way back to the smelting and the origin of the metals that are put in this. Now, the maximum load that is probably put on this device in space is around 50 pounds, possibly maximum a couple of hundred pounds. The REI version of this is rated at 6,500 pounds. This is the kind of thinking that has to change, or we will not be able to return to the moon and go on to Mars for the budget or time scale that we're talking about. We have to also move away from this distrust of the private sector that is out there, the mounds of paperwork that are required, the sorts of flaming hoops that the private sector is required to jump through, and the mindset that the private sector exists to serve as contractors for the government rather than being a co-equal partner in the opening of space. If we are to return to the moon and move on to Mars and make it permanent and not make it a flag and footsteps mission, it has to be an economically viable exercise. It can only be economically viable if profits and rewards are returned to our society, and those can only be realized by the maximization of creation of goods and services. And those are traditionally carried out in our society by the private sector. We have to have an integral relationship with the private sector from day one. Not only an exit strategy that says NASA is moving to the moon to learn to go to Mars and then moving out, which can be shown by, let's say, leasing facilities on the moon rather than building them and owning them. Because, by the way, being on the moon and operating a building on the moon and driving trucks to and from the moon will be as boring as it is driving to and from LEO eventually. NASA has to move on to Mars and keep going where there are, and by the way, Mars has a lot more exciting vistas than the moon will provide. I'm not saying we're going to end up with a great civilization on the moon. The civilization will occur on Mars and the worlds in between. The industry, the growth, the experimentation, the learning will occur on the moon, and then we will move on. I want to see NASA focus, by the way, on, one of the first places that we can get involved with the private sector is, shall we say, the entrance strategy, wherein the private sector is involved from day one in these plans. The private sector is involved in carrying astronauts from Earth to space. NASA's mission used to begin in the Earth and then go into space. No, NASA's mission now begins in space and goes to space. The idea that somehow the crew exploration vehicle is a new thing as opposed to a magic wand waved over the orbital space plane and turned it from a two-door into a station wagon is really the kind of thinking we're dealing with. They're going to go back and roll out the same projects they had before. I want to see change. I want to see dramatic change occur. I want to see NASA do prizes, let's say, early data acquisition. If prizes is not a good word, let's call them contingency contracts. Put out $50 million for a photo map of the south pole of the moon, which is probably where we're going to put our facility, and offer a 2-year time limit and see if a private company can do something in that time and return those images. We'll save a lot of money, we'll mobilize a lot of private sector activities, and we'll create a lot of excitement out there in the world, a competitive excitement. I want to see this all happen. And if we're going to inspire and create our excitement in our children, we have to quit going in circles. We have to go somewhere. We have to go fast. We have to go hard. We don't have to spend our time developing the absolutely highest tech, most expensive machine to get there. We've got to use what we've got. We've got to live off the land. Put the urgency and danger and joy of discovery together, and people will pay attention and support the program. Explore. Shine a light into a lava tube on the moon. Dig for water in the Aitken Basin and show us how to turn it into rocket propellant. Launch rockets off of the moon. Go to Mars. Show the live camera shot from the helmet of the first woman to look into the Val Marineris live on Earth. You want to see excitement that beats what we just saw with these robots? Let's do that. And for good measure, don't deny that people will die. Given the anniversaries we're dealing with, that's a relevant point. Or act surprised when it's going to happen. Let's make that risk a part of the message. Drop the obsessive lip service about safety, and let's actually do something about making things safe. Let's assure that our NASA and our people in space are doing their best to be safe and adopting serious procedures to avoid death. But let's say up front that people will die on this quest. We know it's going to happen. Let's be aware of it, make it a part of it. And once we're back on the moon, let's not stop. It's just as boring, as I said, for NASA to be operating buildings there as it is to orbit the Earth round and round. Keep them going, moving ahead. The Lewis and Clark function, I appreciate you saying that earlier. Let's send them over the hill, tell us what's there, let the settlers and shopkeepers move in after them, and continue expanding the bubble of human life beyond the Earth. That is an exciting agenda, and that is an agenda I think we can achieve and sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tomlinson. Appreciate the panel very much. A couple of questions. I'll turn to my colleague from Texas. Dr. Friedman, are we in another space race now? You cite to several other countries that are with planned missions to Moon. Do you believe we're in another space race that we can be left behind if we don't engage these sort of activities and strategies that you've outlined?
Sometimes when I'm glib, the only space race I describe is the humans versus robots space race, that I think we're both evolving. I mean this in a serious way, that we're both evolving technologically, and it's probably the main reason I support human spaceflight is because I think it's part of our human evolution to go to other worlds. I don't think we're in a space race with other countries. I think the the need for the United States to prove itself technologically as a dominant space player is not necessary as it was in the 1960s when we undertook Project Apollo. If anything, the challenge before us is to learn to cooperate with other countries and to work with the great buildup that is going on in Europe, which is now conducting two planetary missions successfully and has a long-range plan also for the Moon and Mars. Japan, which is doing 2 missions to the Moon and has talked about building a robotic infrastructure on the Moon, and China, who is obviously an emerging space power. And other countries, as has been cited, are developing rocket capability to go to space. The challenge is to work with these countries. It will help us immeasurably, as it has in so many commercial industries,
Dr.
to be
Friedman,
working internationally.
If I could, because the time's going to be very limited
Sure.
here. What you described to me is a space race that whether we choose to enter it or not is probably the question. I mean, we need to cooperate clearly with other countries, but if we don't engage a new vision for NASA, if we say it's too risky, it's too costly, other people, other countries are going to the Moon and beyond. Is that correct?
I accept that. That's correct, Senator. Okay. Yes, I think that's a very good point, that the space race is not the one of competitiveness of trying to prove our greatness, but the space race is the one that's inherent in our civilization to try and prove
whether
ourselves.
we enter it at all, or whether we
Correct.
decide that's just too risky or too expensive, we're not going to go there. Others are.
I think that the reasons for going there are more than just that others are. It's really about what we say about ourselves as well.
Oh, I agree with that. Dr. Lane and Dr. McCurdy you both talked about reorganizing or a transformational experience at NASA. I guess really all three of the other panelists. What are the biggest impediments that Congress can be positively involved in this transformational experience that NASA will need to happen? Where should we focus our light or our energies to see that this NASA transformation takes place?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that my experience has been that previous administrators have made significant attempts to realign NASA, reorganize NASA, reallocate funds to make the whole better than it is, remove some of the waste that my colleague just referred to a few minutes ago. But when you make those changes, it implies, and talk about reallocation, it implies a change of money and people. Jobs then are at stake. And with centers all over the country immediately coming to the defense of their employees and their position in the state, understandably, phone calls get made, and suddenly...
So you're saying we're really going to have to pull NASA in, focus it on fewer areas, and a lot of the extraneous spending we're going to have to get under control to do this?
My view is that it will require focus, and focus is going to be more than, I think, parsing out a complicated plan to the same units, same people in the same locations. And I would also add that each time Congress earmarks NASA's budget, it is not necessarily a bad project, I'm not suggesting, but it's not necessarily a priority project for NASA. It removes some of the flexibility that the administrator has to reallocate funds, to reorganize. So there are several things Congress can do, but what I said in my testimony was the White House and Congress really needs to get behind the administrator when you're satisfied with the administrator's plan. Get behind the administrator and prevent these end runs that will undo the best intentions, which I'm sure he has.
Dr. McCurdy, anything on this one?
Focus on cost. When Jim Webb, the NASA administrator, came before this committee in 1961, he predicted that we could go to the moon for about $20 billion. The cost of Project Apollo through Apollo 11 was $21 billion. Focus on cost, focus on total program cost. Don't let this policy become a Lourdes for NASA, a place where the field centers and existing programs go to get well. That's what I'd suggest.
Mr. Tumlinson, I want to take your thought of, okay, we offer a $50 million reward, kind of like what we did in Iraq, I guess, is what you're saying, for getting Saddam Hussein, but trying to engage the private sector. You're saying offer a $50 million reward for whoever can get the post set up, I guess, on the south pole of the moon. You and you think that we could, with dangling a certain amount of an accomplishment fee out there, actually we could get and engage sufficient private sector capital to get these things accomplished?
Yeah, and the examples are out there. My organization, Fines, offered a prize at one point for small rocketry. We had a lot of people respond. Founding trustee of a thing called the X Prize that has stirred rocket competition around the world, one of the Burt Rutan's vehicle, which is being funded, by the way, by Paul Allen of Microsoft. They're going to spend about $35 million to win a $10 million prize. So the idea of prizes, and again, if we can go into NASA speak or whatever, contingency contracts, they do inspire innovation. There's a long history of that, all the way back to the British Navy, working on a better timekeeper for its ships, put out a prize. Very famous book written about that. So these things do work. I'm not talking about putting a base up for $50 million, by the way. I'm talking about returning high-resolution photographs. The idea of orbiting satellites or probes or that type of thing is the private sector has shown that. They launch communication satellites all the time. There are companies that have that kind of an interest, and that's a number that might inspire them. People smarter than I could probably work out the exact sort of relevant price for that. But I think it will inspire people and get people, there's nothing like a race. Americans love a race and a competition, and I think that's a way to get people involved and lower costs.
Well, and my view of this is that we need to tap into the private sector capacities and abilities and capital to be able to do some of the things that we want to do. And it's not going to be enough to just be able to compete for resources at the public sector, which is going to have a lot of different pushes and political interests. But if you can tap into that, and if there's a way of being able to do that, I hope you and your group and other people that are thinking about this will get to Pete Aldrin's commission and put in some very specific sort of thoughts about now what portions of these missions could be done by private sector if there's a contingency contract or something of that nature that's put out, so that we can see what sort of capital we could tap into and what we can put off to the side on our budget while we focus on something that can't be right now done through the private sector. I hope you'll put forward specific ideas on that.
Yeah, a couple of points I'd like to make there is we have to end this antagonistic relationship between NASA and the private sector. While I'm at it, I'm going to plug a friend's book called Lost in Space. The Fall of NASA and the Dream of a New Space Age by Greg Klertz. Please read this book. It talks about how these situations have come up in the past, how that antagonism has grown, and where we are right now with the alternative space movement versus the space agency and where we could possibly go in the future. I think that on the moon, for example, why not have Hilton provide the housing? Why not have the food provided by commercial food providers? It may not be politically PC to talk about, but the services being provided to the troops in Iraq on their bases are being provided basically commercially. A cheeseburger is a cheeseburger. It doesn't have to be designed by NASA scientists. So I think we can work at those kind of situations. But NASA has to learn that the private sector can be a partner and learn how to work with them and not talk down to them, not try and dominate. NASA should focus on science, should focus on exploration. There will be no private companies that are going to go try to do landers on Mars. That's an appropriate role for the space agency. But these other types of activities, space transportation in particular, from Earth to Leo, running the space station, et cetera, let the private sector step in. It's time.
Senator, look to Antarctica as a model of private-public cooperation.
That's a good thought. Senator Hutchison.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate having the second panel because I think you all have been refreshing and very candid, and in many instances what you've said will lead us to do some other things. I would like to ask Dr. Lane a couple of questions. Of course, I do know Dr. Lane and appreciate so much the role that he has taken for me, advising me on scientific projects and things that we can do to highlight better. And I was pleased in your testimony that you mentioned the National Space Biomedical Research Institute, that it's headed by Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, and that's a good repository for the information that's coming down through NASA and the Johnson Space Center. But it has about 15 other medical schools and universities all over the country, and I think it is a way that we can do something that you suggested as the fourth goal, and that is to assure that we continue to try to be in the forefront as a country in science and engineering, and also to assure that we encourage young people to come into science. My question is, what more do you think we should be doing to achieve that fourth goal, as we are now going to refocus on space exploration? What can we do both in assuring that we keep the engineering and science component, which I did ask the administrator if he was going to maintain the ongoing commitment there, and he said yes. But also, what should we be doing to bring younger people into the excitement of the engineering and research jobs and careers that we want them to pursue?
Thank you, Senator. I think the most important thing that the Congress can do is to look carefully at the plan when it comes out, initially in the President's budget and then in continued interactions with NASA, to see, in fact, if what I've suggested should be a fourth goal really is, because I, with respect, did not hear that in the administrator's comments and his presentation. I did hear a number of enterprises emphasized in connection with the President's announcement. I did not hear science being placed up quite so high on that list. The reason I think it's so important, and particularly the university support, is because that's really where many young people are making their final decisions, if you like, or final decision in their educational process, what their career is going to be. That's where students who think they're going to be scientists and engineers have second thoughts and do something else. If there's something exciting that attracts them, if they have an opportunity to engage in research that's as exciting as what we've seen here today, that can capture a young mind. That's precisely the kind of thing that can build a whole cohort of young scientists and engineers in our states and in our nation to work on projects like space exploration. But they'll be attracted by those few years in the university when they have a chance to get a taste of research. So I think NASA's research programs at the university level are particularly important. And to the extent that you can look at those and look at the way those are cooperative with agencies like the National Science Foundation and other agencies, so that you build a much larger impact than each agency on its own, I think there's a chance to do much more, even with the same amount of money. So I urge you, please look carefully at what the plan is that gets rolled out, and then stay with it along the way to see whether science is more important than I think I heard in the administrator's comments this morning.
Is there large amount, I want to hear from you, but let me just ask you this. Is there a large amount of interaction and cooperation between the National Science Foundation and its projects and NASA?
I think there certainly is good cooperation. I don't know how to scale it. I don't have numbers in mind, but as you know, Senator, the NSF takes responsibility for most of the ground-based observation, the telescopes that are mounted right here on solid Earth, and NASA for the space-based telescopes. but both agencies support an enormous amount of research in universities by theoretical and experimental astronomers and astrophysicists, and I know the agencies interact so that each agency understands in detail the program of the other agency. I'm not worried about wasteful duplication somehow of support, of effort. I'm more interested in coordination to make sure things don't fall through a crack.
Just to pursue that, I was just wondering if there were a function that the NSF could provide from the NASA part of that space research, since they do so much in university research grants and programs. Could they take that as a function, not to duplicate what NASA's doing, but to maybe take that responsibility for that goal and make, their mandate perhaps even more relevant than in some instances maybe it is?
I think it would be very useful for both agencies to clarify for the science community their respective roles and the work they do together in astronomy, astrophysics, space-related research. Because I think in just doing that, both agencies will see some opportunities for supportive university activity that perhaps not being supported right now. Both agencies have a long history of supporting university research. So NASA put together some of the first.
But NSF is a different type. It's more peer review based, grant request based, which is different, I think, from NASA, which is why
both agencies use peer review. They do use it somewhat differently. And I think, along with other science agencies, it would be useful to, everybody could improve their system of peer review, and I'm a believer in peer review. I think with all of its blemishes, it is the best way to assure that the best science and engineering research gets supported. But different agencies do it differently, and I think there's an opportunity for all of them to learn from one another and to improve the way all agencies are supporting science. So I would definitely encourage those kinds of discussions and perhaps hearings on the subject.
Dr. Friedman, did you have something to add?
I was just going to add your question about motivating young people, that we should get that video that we saw this morning out. That's a tremendous motivation. We have a lot of experience with that. And NASA, to their credit, on this very mission, has an educational experiment with the DVD and the sundial up there that were produced for other technical purposes. But we've been engaging students with it in a very cooperative, privately funded educational activity with NASA.
Any others to add to that?
Well, my generation was raised on Buck Rogers and Collier's magazines and Tomorrowland at Disney World. The new generation is interested in space to the same degree, but for different reasons. And I think the administration has tapped into that with the mixing of robotic and human capabilities. Kids are really interested in robots, electronics, virtual reality. And so to the extent that that mix continues in the program, I think it will attract a young generation to want to be scientists and engineers and support it. Support the space program in the same way that us here in our generation are supporting it now.
Yeah, 2 quick points on that issue. One is I agree with everything that's been said, and the idea that you could grow up and actually be somebody exploring Mars yourself someday is very exciting. Regarding the NSF-NASA relationship, to me, one of the exciting things about the moon is that it doesn't have to be an all-NASA project. I'm not just talking about the commercial sector. Why not have NSF grant-winning universities operating far-side observatories as opposed to NASA? Those types of things, and bring in, shall we say, more slices of the government pie there to supplement the kind of budgets they have.
Well, let me just add one more thought. When recently I was listening to Dr. Malcolm Gillis, who is the head of your institution, Dr. Lane, he remarked that when Dr. Richard Smalley and his partner were, it was announced that they were awarded the Nobel Prize for nanotechnology research, they were teaching freshman chemistry. And I thought, in addition to what you have said, to have our stars in the field, the astronauts or other scientific stars, to reach out and teach freshmen or high school students would also be very exciting. I can't even imagine what a freshman would think when the day that they are taking their freshman chemistry class, their professor is awarded the Nobel Prize. So
I think they'd think, is my homework still going to be due at the end of the period?
you're probably right, just to take away all the magic.
Senator Hutchison, real quick, you mentioned nanotechnology. We've talked a lot about the inspiration for education. There's a great picture of the late Dr. Gerard O'Neill, who was a major space advocate, working with a mass driver device that he was working on that was going to be used to deliver payloads off the moon. In the picture is one of his young proteges working with him. The kid's name was Dr. Eric Drexler. He created the nano movement and the name and the entire concept. He was inspired by space. I just wanted to bring out that little note.
Well, it's very important, and I would say to Dr. Lane, in addition to homework, I do think that probably those young people are making up the scientists of the future because they are so inspired. Well, we do have a vote on, and that's why Senator Brownback has left. But thank you very much. This was very helpful, and I think will be part of our oversight of NASA as we move into a very exciting era. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.